Okay, let's try it again. Happy February. Here we are on February 5th, going over the full month data for January. Um, I can tell you the beginning of the month started out strong and the end of the month was a little weaker. If I did a poll, I mean, I think most of you that are out there operating kind of know that the end of the month got impacted by weather. And I think you'll see that across the board. So in most cases, the month was doing pretty good until the last half of the month and more particularly the last week of the month where we had pretty significant weather across most of the East Coast. And really, I mean, there was significant weather a lot of places. So that more than any other factor, I think, is results in why January came in a little softer than we might have hoped, but the net is, despite all that, it still was in positive territory over last year. So when we look at Charter, it was up just under 1% at 0.88. And when we look at the 135 year over year, you can see we're now on the third year of a trend of slightly better performance in January. We'll have to see how February shakes out. Weather could also be a factor in how this month plays out overall. But you can see that last year, if we look here, the month of February was weaker than the month of January. Hopefully that trend reverses in 2026. So here we are looking at Part 91. Very similar, very strong first half of the month, followed by some weaker performance in the back half of the month, particularly in the last week. Again, I do believe that weather was the most significant factor there as opposed to anything in the economy or anything like that. Can see here that the Part 91 and Part 91K traffic is sort of on a continuous upward climb here other than 2020. And when we combine those two things, obviously two pluses equal a plus. So the positive combined traffic is up 4.25%. And that's for the full month of January. So here's light jets. We showed 0.2% increase there. They were very popular over the holiday period, though. We saw some nice year-over-year positives over the holidays. And here are mid-size. We're actually down by 2.2%. So those aircraft were softer, particularly in the last couple weeks. And super mids fared much better. As a matter of fact, the third week of the month, they were up 9.4%, but you can see that in the last 7 days, they're only up 1.4. So they were impacted, just not quite to the same degree as these other types. And then when we look at large cabin aircraft, we can see we were up just 0.1%. And in the last 2 weeks of the month, we're off 1% and off 2%. So I'm looking down here at these prior 7 days and last 7 days numbers in there. And so these heavy jets were in positive territory in the first part of the month. Here are turboprops, came in just below last year, 1.1% below, and same deal, off 4.5% and then off 8% for the last week. You're just going to see this trend with the last week of the month being tough throughout this whole deck this week. So here we go. Here's Los Angeles for airline traffic. Here is Los Angeles for GA. Now the GA is well up, and that's because of other issues, in particular some closures at Van Nuys, right? So we'll see in the first half of the month here, Van Nuys runway construction really impacted things, but in the last week of the month was actually up 4.1%. So that's a year over year gain, which is nice to see. And it speaks to most of the weather being on the East Coast. So here's LaGuardia coming back to the East Coast. You can see that things were off quite a bit there, and that's schedule disruption, weather-related stuff. Here's Teterboro. You can see the last week of the month there was also off 13.2%, but the month as a whole came in up 4.2%. So the last week weather didn't erase all the gains. Here's White Plains, similar deal. Farmingdale, similar deal, up 2.3%, but the last week of the month was off 29.7%. So you can see this is a trend we're just going to follow all the way through the deck this week. Here's Morristown, which actually was taken into negative territory by the last 2 weeks of the month, off 7.2 and then off 14.3%. So going to the middle of the country, you can see that Midway, all traffic, including the airlines, wound up off 3.3%. When we pulled out the airlines, we're actually up 3%. Oh, and what's this? Got on late. Can you show the 135 slide? I will. Let me just get through this, and Craig and I will run back up to the top of the deck and show you the 135 slide again. It is up 0.88% for the month. Well, but I'm happy to go back there. Then when we look at Atlanta, we are for the airlines up 0.9%. You can see here too that that last week of the month was off. Here is Atlanta for GA. You can see off quite a bit there. Now this spike, which was a weather event last year, just didn't happen this year, which is part of the reason we're seeing this trend. And you can see the last week of the month actually for Atlanta, volume was up 14%. So that's airline travel impact that Delta recovered with some private jet lift, presumably from Wheels Up. Here is Peachtree, where traffic wound up off 2.3% for the month as a whole. And you can see the last couple of weeks of the month were tough. Here is Boston, where we are off, this is including the airlines, off 6.3%. And you can see the big weather impact here where all the flights got canceled. Here's the same deal for GA, off only 1.9% there, but the last week of the month, traffic was down 20%. Bedford, same story, but the earlier in the month traffic was enough to keep things in positive territory. So the last week of the month was off 14.8%, but the month as a whole was up 3.3. Here is Reagan National, right? And again, I mean, I say this every time, but this airport is really just in the deck to give you an indication of a domestic U.S. airline airport and how that's trending. At this point, it was trending exactly even with last year, within 8 flights actually, and it had the same issue where last week of the month traffic was off 26.2%, which erased some modest gains before that. Then now we're looking at Dulles, including all the airlines and everything in there, off 2.4%, and then off 8.4% when we take out the when we take out the airlines. Of course, we didn't have inauguration this year, which is part of the reason for that. Same thing for Manassas. We're off 6.2%, but again, I think it's worth noting that we had an inauguration last year, which drove more traffic into this airport for this month. Here is Charlotte, weather impacts there. This is all traffic. And then here it is for the GA. In both cases, we saw it flip from positive to negative territory. Well, I should say the airlines were off for the full month, but the GA was in positive territory until the weather impact. So looking at our second home cities, here is West Hampton. We're clearly off season there, and our summary chart is covering up all the numbers. But you can see that we're off 10.2%, and the last 2 weeks of the month we're off even slightly more than that. But we are off season and we're dealing with single digit numbers, so it's not really all that indicative. Here's Aspen, including the airlines, off 4.9%, off 8.4% when we take the airlines out. A big driver here is that the snow in Colorado has not been fabulous so far this year. So that has people going to other places. Eagle, similar situation. Matter of fact, to an even greater degree with the GA traffic off 16.3%. Then here is Denver proper, which obviously isn't so much of a leisure destination, was up 7.2% for the month and 16% last week of the month. So that's the outlier in terms of an airport that was not impacted by all the travel by all the weather. So here's Nantucket, going back to the East Coast. You can see in here that traffic was up 12.6%. It seems like there are more people just going to Nantucket in the off season. Granted, these flight numbers are still pretty low, but the last week of the month they were impacted by weather as well. Here's Martha's Vineyard, similar trend, up 8.3% for the month, off 24.7% for the last week. And then here is Napa, off 4.9% for the month, off 15% for the last week. Bandon Dunes, off kind of across the board there. And then here is Scottsdale, where we're seeing 10.2% increase for the month as a whole and 9.9% that last week of the month, so not impacted by the weather at all. Jackson Hole, off 7.4% for the last week of the month, came in just slightly under um, last year at off by 0.5%. So that just speaks to the traffic going to Jackson Hole, right? There wasn't really weather out there, but the people that were trying to get there from the East Coast is, I think, what drove that. Here's Hilton Head on the East Coast, off 3.2%, and that compares to yeah, well, I should say this airport was in positive territory until that last week of the month. You can see that traffic was up 87.9%, over 200 flights versus 100 flights for the third week of the month. And then those gains got pretty much erased by the last week. Looking at our other cities, here is Addison and Dallas, off 25.8% for the last week, but that did not erase the positive trend for the month as a whole, where things are up 5.4%. Here is Dallas Love, off 1.3% for the airlines, and still in positive territory on the GA side, up 4.6%, but did have a 9.9% dip in the last week of the month. So let's look at Houston. We're up 11.7% for the month and off 2.8% for the last week of the month. Here is Florida, Opelika. Very different trend there, actually up 24.6% for the month. And you'll see this also in the OD pair trend chart, where Florida, the New York to Florida traffic is just on fire right now. And it's just interesting that it did not get as significantly impacted by the weather and did not have the dip that we had last year. So the traffic is up pretty significantly there. Here's Fort Lauderdale International, which was impacted. You can see the dip on the day with everybody else. Here's Fort Lauderdale International GA, and we can see it was off 24.1%. Here is Fort Lauderdale Exec, where we're off 10.1% for that last week of the month, but up 18.8% for the month as a whole. And then here is Naples, off 11.6% for the last week of the month, but up 2.8% for the whole month. Then we look at West Palm, and this is all traffic, off 13.1%. GA off 22.6%, but actually did okay that last week of the month. There were no presidential TFRs, and that is what has been impacting the Palm Beach airport more than any other factor. So we've got Nassau left, and Nassau had a nice January, up 8.3% and up 21.1% that last week. And now when we go to our top 50 OD pairs, look at all the orange and green. That is New York market to Florida market. So that's pretty much all the way through the top 16 OD pairs. Most of those are in there. Yes, there's a little bit of Scottsdale and a little Houston and whatnot, but it's predominantly back and forth from New York to Florida. You can see that Van Nuys is back into the mix. And we had almost 100 more flights, in the top 50, which means there's more concentration in terms of where people were flying to over this last couple of weeks, because this is 2 weeks worth of data here. And then when we look at fuel, you can see it's going back and forth. And here we are with a lot of red. Colorado taking the cake, up 39 cents per gallon. And most of the West Coast states were down slightly. So that's what's happening with the fuel. Now I will, that's the last slide in the deck. Oh, I shouldn't say, sorry. Last slide other than the one that gives you the actual fuel prices. So you can see the Colorado fuel price is currently at $6.77. Alaska is $7.71. Those are some of the highest priced locations in the country, and Rhode Island is also up there. So that is the last slide. Now let me go back and revisit the charter slide. While I'm doing that, if anybody has any questions you're curious to ask the group, or anything you would like to see again, by all means, you can either comment in the chat or unmute yourself and throw it out here. I did mention in the email that I sent out that we have, the local winter aviation geek thing that goes on around here is this ice runway up in Alton Bay on Lake Winnipesaukee, and that has opened and been open for a full week. And looks like with the cold weather we're having, this could be one of the longest seasons for that in quite a while. So that's kind of a cool thing to watch. I've done it in
And Greg, the stuff up here has been tremendous. I understand on Wednesday they had 112 arrivals for a
wow.
weekday.
Wow. Yeah, that's a lot, right? Like I guess part of it is, people wonder because it's not predictable. Is it going to be open or not open? And it's been so cold for a while here with a forecast to continue that people can kind of plan ahead. So I mean that's great because last year I think was a record year, right? And it looks like it's going to be open longer this year, so it should break a record again this year. Anyway, it can be cold, but it's kind of fun, and you see, airplanes and snowmobiles, and they put like a skating rink out there next to the whole thing, and the whole town kind of gets into it. It's kind of fun. So that's our local weather thing, and that was Lee up there who runs the FBO in Laconia. I imagine that benefits you some, right? You get a bunch of people that then bounce over there to get fuel.
Yes, they do, and we sell a lot of it. We've sold a ton of it the last week.
That and hot chocolate and coffee.
Yes, that and coffee. Yep.
All right. Well, so that's what we got for this week. I think, all things considered, a pretty good month of January. Really, the biggest thing that impacted us that we don't have any control over is the weather there the last week of the month. This past week's been pretty good. And well, I should say the Carolinas and whatnot actually got whacked pretty hard, but up here in the Northeast, we did okay. So that's going to be the factor this time of year. We get weather that really can take down the flying. But absent that, it seems like the sentiment and the other things that we need to pay attention to in the market seem to be in pretty good shape. So that's my take on things. We'll chat again in a couple weeks, and we'll be halfway through February. We'll see how things are going there. I do believe that business trip intent is still stronger than leisure trip intent right now for whatever reason. So as we get into the spring break season, it's going to be interesting to see how those periods track compared to last year. But that's where we're at.
Hey Greg, can you show me Powaki again? I'm sorry I missed it.
No, do not need to apologize. I am happy to do that. And I'll say it right now. If you want the whole deck, I am happy to share it with folks that jump on the call. Just send me an email, greg@tuvoli.com. Oops, I went by it, didn't I? And I'll send the deck to you. There you go. All right.
Thank you.
You bet. All right. Well, thanks everybody. Until next time, have a great couple weeks. We'll talk halfway through February. Thanks. Take care.
Thanks, Greg.
Yep.
Thanks, Greg.
You bet. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Greg. We appreciate all you do.
Yep, sure thing.